Stop being dramatic, Morgan. We are in the middle of a VIP consultation for your sister's nose. That is exactly what my father said to me while my 7-year-old son, Noah, was going into anaphylactic shock on a school floor. I was trapped in a mudslide 3 hours away, screaming into a satellite phone, begging him to just drive 10 minutes and authorize the EpiPen that would save Noah's life. He didn't ask if Noah was okay. He just sighed because I had interrupted them and hung up the phone. In that dead silence, I realized two things. My son could die because of a nose job, and I was done being the daughter who begged. Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I want to see how far this story reaches. I didn't scream again. Screaming wastes oxygen, and at 5,000 feet in a mudslide, oxygen is equity. I pulled the heavy-duty satellite phone from my vest. I didn't call the police. They couldn't get a chopper up in this weather. I called a private extraction team I had on retainer for high-risk geological surveys. The dispatcher hesitated when he heard the wind howling against the receiver. He quoted me a high-risk extraction surcharge that would bankrupt most people. I didn't blink. I shouted my Amex Black Card details over the roar of the gale, authorizing a $4,500 charge without a second thought. That was the price of my son's life. I arrived at the hospital 3 hours later, still covered in geological grit, looking like I had crawled out of the earth itself. Noah was stabilized. He was sleeping, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was the only thing keeping me tethered to the ground. I sat in the plastic chair next to his bed, watching the monitors beep. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't a text from my mother asking if her grandson was alive. It was a notification from my bank. A fraud alert. See, I am the primary account holder on the family support card I gave my parents years ago. I told them it was for emergencies, groceries, medical bills, survival. The algorithm flagged a transaction as unusual activity because it didn't match the history of utility payments. I looked at the screen. $5,000, Beverly Hills Aesthetics. The timestamp was exactly 40 minutes ago. While I was screaming into a satellite phone, terrified my son was dying, they were swiping my card to pay for the very appointment that kept them from answering my call. They used my money to buy the silence that almost killed my child. In my line of work, we study something called root rot. It's a fungal disease that attacks plants underground. On the surface, the leaves look green, the flowers are bright, and everything appears healthy. But underneath the soil, the roots are turning into black mush. The rot eats the structural integrity of the plant until one day, the whole thing just collapses. My parents are root rot. For years, I was the invisible nutrient source keeping their leaves green. I paid their bills, I covered their debts, and I let them pretend they were successful while I played the part of the dirty, useless daughter. They mocked my career in soil science, calling me Mud Girl, never realizing that the mud they despised was the only reason they weren't homeless. I looked at Noah's sleeping face, then back at the fraud alert. I didn't cry. I didn't call them to argue. I just opened my laptop. It was time to stop feeding the rot. I logged into the banking portal and didn't just lock the card. I initiated the protocol to dissolve the entire financial ecosystem I had built around them. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was preparing to expose the decay. If they wanted to treat me like dirt, I was going to show them exactly what happens when the ground gives way beneath your feet. Mud Girl. That was their nickname for me. Not doctor, not scientist. Just Mud Girl. When I finished my PhD in mycology, my mother didn't come to the ceremony because she said the smell of the agriculture campus gave her a migraine. My father asked me why I wasted my 20s learning how to play in the dirt when I could have married a banker. They looked at my work boots and saw failure. They looked at my 10-year-old truck and saw poverty. They didn't know that dirt pays better than banking if you own the intellectual property. 6 years ago, I developed a fungal-resistant soil treatment that revolutionized commercial agriculture in the Pacific Northwest. I hold the patent. Every time a major vineyard in Napa or a wheat farm in Oregon treats their fields, I get paid. I don't flaunt it. I don't wear labels, and I don't drive a lease. I live quietly because I know the difference between being rich and looking rich. My parents never learned that distinction. They spent 40 years chasing the appearance of wealth, leveraging every asset they had to buy things they couldn't afford, all to impress people who didn't care. They were drowning. I knew it because I was the one keeping their heads above water, and I wasn't just paying their grocery bills. 3 years ago, when their adjustable-rate mortgage was about to swallow their house, I didn't hand them cash. I knew they would just spend it on a new car or another aesthetic refresh for Chinmay. Instead, I set up a blind trust. Through a broker, I bought their debt. I became their silent creditor. I told myself I was doing it for Chinmay, to keep a roof over my sister's head. Or maybe I was just pathetic enough to hope that if I saved them, they might eventually respect me. I was wrong. You can't buy respect from people who measure worth in nose jobs and country club memberships. Sitting in that hospital room, watching the slow rise and fall of Noah's chest, the last shred of my daughterly obligation evaporated. They didn't care that I paid their mortgage. They didn't care that I was the reason they still had a zip code to brag about. They only cared that I was dramatic for interrupting their vanity. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. It wasn't a family member. It was Marcus, a hard money lender who acts as the face of my private investment portfolio. He picked up on the first ring, professional and crisp. "Dr. Morgan," he said. "Everything all right?" "No," I said, my voice flat. "It's time to execute the contingency plan on the Gregory asset." Marcus paused. He knew who Gregory was. He knew the delicate dance I'd been doing to keep my parents afloat without them knowing it was me. "Are you sure? Once we initiate the commercial bridge loan offer, there's no going back. If they violate the terms, it's a hard foreclosure." "I know," I said. "Draft the paperwork. Offer them $280,000. Make the interest rate attractive enough that they bite, but strict enough that they choke. And Marcus? Make sure the capital improvement clause is airtight. I want them to think they've won the lottery." I hung up. My father thought he was a business genius who was just temporarily embarrassed by cash flow. I was about to offer him a rope. I knew exactly what he would do with it. He wouldn't use it to pull himself out of the hole. He would use it to hang himself. It didn't take long. Greed is predictable like gravity. 2 days after Marcus sent the offer, my phone rang. It was Gregory. He didn't ask about Noah. He didn't ask why the credit card stopped working. He sounded triumphant, practically gloating. "Morgan," he said, his voice loud. "You'll never guess what happened. I just closed a major deal. A huge influx of capital for the business." I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the black screen of my laptop. "That's great, Dad," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What kind of deal?" "Oh, just some private equity group," he said dismissively. "They saw the potential in my consulting firm. Offered me $280,000. Basically begged me to take it. These guys are desperate to park their money somewhere smart." I closed my eyes for a second. He actually believed it. He believed a stranger looked at his failing business, his maxed-out credit, and his zero assets, and decided he was a genius. That is the blind spot of a narcissist. They can't imagine a world where they aren't the smartest person in the room. He thought he was playing them. He had no idea he was talking to the bank. "So, what are you going to do with the money?" I asked. "Pay off the house. Clear the credit card debt." He laughed. A short, sharp bark. "Don't be small-minded, Morgan. You have to spend money to make money. I need to project success. Clients don't hire a consultant who drives a 5-year-old Mercedes." "Dad," I said, letting a hint of warning creep into my voice. "Be careful. Did you read the loan terms? Usually that kind of money is restricted. Capital improvements only." "Please," he scoffed. "I know how to handle these people. I outsmarted them. I wrote a check to your uncle's construction company for foundation pouring. He's going to cash it, keep a little fee, and give me the rest in cash. It's called leverage, Morgan. Maybe if you spent less time playing in the dirt and more time in the real world, you'd understand high finance." My hand tightened around the phone. He wasn't just arrogant, he was confessing. He was laundering the loan money through a shell company to bypass the contract terms. He thought he was bragging about a clever loophole. He was actually admitting to federal wire fraud. "You bought a Porsche, didn't you?" I asked quietly. "A Panamera," he said, the pride oozing through the speaker. "Black on black. I'm picking it up this afternoon. I'm going to drive it to the club for lunch. You should see the look on people's faces when I pull up. It's respect, Morgan. Something you can't get digging holes." "Enjoy the lunch, Dad," I said. "Really? Enjoy every bite." I hung up. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the rules didn't apply to him because he was Gregory, the man who deserved everything. He didn't know that the stupid lender he just defrauded was his own daughter. And he definitely didn't know that by laundering that money, He hadn't just broken a contract. He had handed me the handcuffs. I waited until I knew he was at the country club. I wanted him to be comfortable. I wanted him to be surrounded by the people whose validation he craved like a drug. At 12:30 in the afternoon, I called Marcus. "Is the Porsche confirmed?" I asked. "Confirmed," Marcus replied. "Registered this morning. Paid in cash." "And Morgan?" He sent a photo of the title to the loan officer to brag. He just handed us the evidence on a silver platter. "File it," I said. "Execute the confession of judgment." Because Gregory had signed the loan as a commercial borrower to get a lower rate and bypass consumer protection laws, he had waived his right to a trial. The confession of judgment clause meant that if he violated any term of the agreement, like using capital improvement funds to buy a luxury vehicle, he automatically admitted liability. There would be no court date, no defense attorney, no judge, just a stamp from the county clerk transferring the title of his house to my LLC. "It's done," Marcus said 10 minutes later. "The deed is recorded. The property is yours. I've dispatched the process server." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "Send the final bill." "Already taken from their remaining escrow," he said. "Pleasure doing business, Dr. Morgan." I hung up and pulled up the GPS tracker I had put on the family support car years ago. I watched the little d sitting at the country club. I imagined him there, ordering the most expensive scotch, laughing with his friends about how clever he was. Then I imagined the process server walking across the patio. I wasn't there to see it, but the server told me later it was textbook. Gregory was leaning against the new Porsche, showing it off to a group of golf buddies. The server walked up, confirmed his identity, and handed him a single envelope. "You've been served, sir. Eviction notice. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." "What is this?" Gregory reportedly stammered, his face turning the color of ash. "I own my house." "Not anymore," the server said loud enough for the golf buddies to hear. "You defaulted on your commercial loan this morning. The keys to this vehicle and the property now belong to Morgan Holdings, LLC." I sat in my quiet, modest living room and took a sip of water. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. It was the sound of a debt finally being paid. They didn't pack. They didn't apologize. They did exactly what a cornered narcissist does. They attacked. 3 days after the process server dropped the bomb, I got a letter. Not a moving notice, but a lawsuit. Gregory had hired a strip mall attorney who specialized in predatory lending cases. They were suing my LLC, claiming the loan terms were unconscionable, that they had been tricked, and this was the cherry on top, that they had suffered emotional distress worth $3 million. My broker called me, sounding nervous. "Morgan, they filed a lease pendens. It freezes the property title. We can't sell. They could drag this out in civil court for 2 years. You might have to settle just to get them out." For a moment, the old fear surfaced. The child who had been told she was wrong, who had been gaslit into silence. Sitting in my kitchen with their legal threat in hand, I realized they were counting on that girl returning. They were wrong. I wasn't just a lender. I was a scientist. And scientists don't guess, they verify. I told the broker to force discovery and demand every receipt for their so-called capital improvements. 2 weeks later, their lawyer submitted invoices. My forensic accountant, Sarah, needed 5 minutes to expose the fraud. The concrete company existed only on paper. The PDF had been created after the lawsuit was filed, and the tax ID belonged to a defunct dry cleaner in Nevada. Gregory hadn't just misused the money. He had forged documents and emailed them to release funds. That made it wire fraud. Federal. I packaged everything, the shell company transfers, fake invoices, and Porsche title, and delivered it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The trap snapped shut. Agents raided their house the following Tuesday, seized records, froze accounts, and impounded the car. Gregory wasn't arrested that day, but 4 hours later, he collapsed while screaming at his lawyer. A massive stroke. At the hospital, Cynthia accused me of killing him. I didn't flinch. His blood pressure did that. His rage did that. When the doctor asked for the financial proxy to authorize expensive surgery, the room froze. Insurance canceled. Accounts frozen. They had nothing. They begged me to pay. I told the doctor I was his landlord and the plaintiff in a federal fraud case. I had no authority and no obligation. Follow protocol for indigent patients. I walked out while Cynthia screamed behind me. 6 months later, the house sold at auction. I didn't keep the proceeds. Instead, I created an agricultural scholarship for first-generation soil science students discouraged by their families. My parents' legacy now funds the dirt diggers they despised. My son is thriving. We spend weekends testing soil in the vineyards. He knows we don't visit his grandparents anymore. He understands safety. Yesterday, standing among dormant vines, hands in living earth, I remembered the rule of nature. Rot must be cut away before anything healthy can grow. That night, I opened the spreadsheet where I had tracked every dollar and insult for 32 years. And I deleted it. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I cleared the rot so my son could bloom. If you've ever had to prune your own family tree to save yourself, you're not alone.